Hi, Scott Livingston here from ReconditioningHQ.com. We've been talking about the lateral cut mechanism and mechanics. We talked about all the different parts of it, and then we talked about the foot context. Now let's go above the knee to the hip, which is the other driver of knee position and foot position, the hip joint. So we want to make sure that we have mobility in the hip and also control of that hip. So do we have a hardware restriction in that hip or a software restriction? Are we not able to actually control and manifest movement through that hip properly, or is it actually limited? So we need to be able to assess that, and that's what we spent some time in our level 1 course doing. If you don't assess, then you don't know what it is that you're actually dealing with. But let's say for now we've got a hardware restriction in our hip. The hip's not moving very well, and we want to get it to let go and give way. So remember, we're talking contextually about the ability to abduct and adduct and femorally, internally, externally rotate on a pelvis. So that basically looks like, if I was laying on my back, me being able to glide that femur in and out, okay? So if I want to do that, I could use traction as a form of a way of down-toning the hip and letting it start to let go a little bit. So we can put these heavy bands into the groin region, take it up into that 3-point position that we showed in our last video. Make sure we've got good foot position. We've already talked about that. We'll be talking in a future video about the pelvic position, but we want to have good pelvic and trunk position, breathing, and then we take some traction so that pulling that femoral head out of the hip socket, it's about a 45-degree angle, and get into this position. And what we can then do is mobilize that hip, actively driving the femur out and in whilst we're in traction. And we can put holds or even push a little bit, push out and push in that position. And if we want to put a little bit of weight bearing into the position, we can add and drive, moving around here. We can do big circles. We can also just simply use that traction and mobilize a little bit more effectively the whole joint to make sure that we've got that availability of motion through that hip without it being picked up in the pelvis. We can also try to mobilize it from outside in using foam balls or rollers. We can get up on those balls and get into the rotators of the hip joint and really start to let those guys release a little bit, down tone those tissues, manifest different positions. Again, when we're doing this stuff, we don't want to create more stress. We want to create a reduction in tone. That also links to breathing. We want to make sure that we've got a good breath, that we're down-toning the system, we're making it available for the range that we want to uptake. Once we've got that available range, well, we want to control it. So to control it, we want to work on our ability to drag in and out in a grounded position, linking to the foot that we worked on last week. Then we want to be able to weight bear on that, so we can come up into that quarter squat position. And can we manipulate and mobilize? We can open that chain up, and now we can manipulate and mobilize the femur there with the pelvis under control. We can change stance if we want to around that femur, okay? We can manipulate and mobilize that, and we can also manipulate and mobilize the pelvis on the femur. So now I can position and move the pelvis around the femur or move the femur on the pelvis. And activating that gets us the available use of that position. And then what we want to do is start to activate with speed so we can absorb into, close that femur, open that femur with a little bit of a pop, and we can add load to it if we want to. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure, do we have a hardware issue or a software issue with that hip? Is it activating properly? And then what's our ground contact position in our foot, and what's our trunk look like?